Hi everybody, Brian from Witch Doctor here. Thanks for tuning in. Wanted to do a segment on reloading methods. Been getting a lot of questions lately about what do you do here, how do you do that with reloading. So just wanted to go over how I do it and some of the tools and some other kinds of recommendations. So we'll start with reloading itself. For me, is a lot easier when I have my own reamer for like a commonly used or a high frequency chamber. I happen to use a 6 ppc chamber for a lot of my matches. Also use the 6 dasher 6 BRA for a lot of matches. So it's always good to have your own reamer. The reamer is the tool that the gunsmith uses to cut the chamber in the barrel. This is an example of the reamer specs for my particular 6 ppc rifle, and I have others for the BRA, dasher, etc. So anyway, by having your own reamer and your own go no-go gauges, these are gauges the gunsmith uses to assess the headspace, make sure the headspace is correct. What that does is that enables me to utilize what I call the known load method, method where if this reamer spec goes, paired with this type of brass and certain bullet types, I'm able to basically reload very similar between barrels, as long as the barrel length is about the same and the contour is about the same. I'm able to use very similar loads to what I've used using this reamer or other reamers I have. So that's kind of one of my first recommendations. If you have a particular chamber you shoot a lot and you chamber barrels with, probably good to get your own reamer, assuming that you have access to a gunsmith who will utilize your reamer to cut your barrel chambers. Anyway, so starting over here, I have a scale here. Weighing primers is something that I started doing after I did a lot of my primer sorting tests. And by the way, you're going to find that a lot of the practices that I'm going to talk about today, I have done tests on and produced appreciable data that has demonstrated that a certain method is, useful, better than others, or just a good thing to do in terms of improving your ballistics and your precision. One thing I did find with my testing is there's lots of variability in the primer weights, and those weights definitely correlate with the ballistics, like velocity. And if you use primers of very similar weights, you can get smaller standard deviations on your velocity and smaller extreme spread. So what I started doing is I'm starting to weigh primers, and then on the primer packages I actually put the weight of the primer. So the primers in this package are either 3.66 or 3.67 in weight, and you have to have a pretty precise scale in order to do this, and this scale here definitely gets the job done in terms of being able to weigh them to a very minute degree. Okay, so one of the first steps that I do after I fire a case, and I do fire form all of my cases before I go into like a match condition. I do have fire forming barrels, again, for the high volume type of cartridges that I use. So I have 6 ppc I use a lot. So I do have a 6 ppc basically fire forming barrel where it's a worn out barrel, it's not very precise anymore, and I will use it to just simply fire form. What I do is I use a certain powder, definitely not my match powder, but a certain powder, and then I use dud bullets, or bullets where a bullet smith has determined these bullets aren't any good for some reason, and we use them for sighters or for fowler rounds or for fire forming. And so I'll get a bunch of those, load it with a certain powder, not a super stout load, but enough to where that shoulder gets fully bumped in that chamber, and I pull the case out and it's pretty well fire formed. Anyway, so to start with, and I also do neck turning if I have to. Definitely, in chambers where they're very small chambers around the neck area, and I have to cut some brass off, I certainly will. I'll do neck turning. If I don't have to neck turn, like in this case, this is a 6 ppc case, a Norma brass, and I have my Reamer is a 268 neck, and this brass actually does not need to be turned for this Reamer. But what I do though is I set my cutting tool to 11 thousandths, which I think is what the thickness of the wall is on this. And I will do what I call a clean cut, just clean off some of the imperfections of the case, and that works well. I don't get a whole lot of imperfection, but I do get some here and there, enough to where you see a little bit of shavings after you clean the necks of maybe 10 cases or so. So there is a slight bit of cleaning that is going on there. One thing that I will also do in that process is measure the neck. So I have my tools set up, like this tool for example will help me measure neck thickness. So after I turn necks, I will go ahead and place the piece of brass into this tool and then go ahead and measure the neck thickness. As you can see here, this neck thickness, well, it might be hard to see, I'm not sure, is about 11 thousandths. So these necks have been clean turned and all spec out to about 11 thousandths. And so that's what I use this tool for. Put that back. Okay, so let's say fire case. What are my steps in the process here? Well, the first step is I usually take a look at the carbon on the neck. If it's going down into the shoulder here, that's usually a sign that the chamber is not sealing up really well. If it stays above the shoulder, that's a pretty good sign. I also look for a sine wave pattern on the neck, where you can see the carbon kind of going up, going down, going up, going down. What I'll do is I'll take some steel wool and just take the carbon off. It's pretty simple. Then I'll wipe off where the steel wool was. Okay, so that's my first step in the process, inspecting the case and then wiping off the carbon on the neck with steel wool. Another step in the process here, right after that, or I'm sorry, right after that, I take a nylon brush, send it through the inside of the neck, pull it out. That gets out any residual flakes of carbon that are inside the neck. Give it a little wipe down. Okay, and then after that, I anneal it here. I use the Annealing Made Perfect machine, and basically what it does is you put the case into this thing here, and then put the correct, let's see, right here, number 1 goes with this particular case. They have different inserts here according to different pieces of brass. We'll put it in there, anneal it, take it out, assuming it stays in, and then just drop it here in my metal pan, because it's really hot, so you don't want to touch it. So I put it on a metal pan there to let it cool. And I do this with, I have used batches of brass. Sometimes I'll use a batch of 30, 40 pieces. Sometimes I'll use a batch of 100, depending on the match. Like with this 30 BR, I usually have about 90 cases in my batch, because that's about how many I'll shoot in a score match. For short range bench rest, I might have like 30 or 40, because that's about how many I'll use in a weekend match. Okay, so after it's annealed, and then take it over here and use, well, this is a lanolin based sizing wax. It's basically, there's no odor, which I really like about it. Apply a little bit to the case, and it's really not dirty. It doesn't stink, and it does the job really well. Again, that's Highline Precision Lanolin Sizing Wax. And then what I do is I have my sizing die and my press ready, and then I'll go ahead and size it. I have my dies set up to bump to 2 thousandths. I do put notes on here, bump it to this particular spec. So if I bump this to 0.5 thousandths to 1 thousandths on my case gauge micrometer, That means that this case will be bumped 1.5 to 2 thousandths, which again, my testing has shown that seems to be the ideal shoulder bump. Okay, and then I'll wipe it off, clean that off. I use bushing dies. So what that enables me to do is to control neck tension really well. And I have measured this many times. The neck diameter, I use this tool to measure neck diameter. And as long as you anneal and use a good bushing and a high quality sizing die, you should get very uniform neck diameters. I very rarely will see any variation at all, frankly, using this type of setup with a bushing. Bushing die is definitely recommended if you turn necks. If you decide not to turn necks, then something like a mandrel could be the appropriate way to size your brass. So the bushing in here, what's cool about this is you can use all different size bushings, and sometimes I find that certain neck diameters go better with different bullet and powder combos. For example, 6 ppc using particular bullets, and N133 powder tends to like higher neck tension. Same thing with my 30 BR. If I'm using a certain bullet and certain powder combination, it really likes 3 to 4 thousandths neck tension, seems to shoot better. And sometimes, like with the Dasher or the BRA, usually I start at 2 thousandths neck tension and see if I can get a really good shoot and load from that. And I might go to 3 or 4 to test to see if I get anything better, but typically with those cartridges tend to stick to around 2 thousandths in terms of sizing the neck there. Anyway, so this sizes the neck and it bumps the shoulder back all in one operation. I run 2 presses. This is my high volume press, Salvadori Ferenzi Eterna press. It's super heavy duty and gets the job done really well. This press I use for my 6 ppc, and it comes right off of the reloading bench here, so you can take it with you to a match and load at the match. Okay, so now after I'm sized and whatnot, I go ahead and I prime. And again, I'll use primers that I have weighed and measured. So let me go back to this. So I will, make sure that it's written on there. I'll dump it out into my priming tray. And I use a few different types of priming tools. This priming tool here, I like. This is a 21st century priming tool. You just drop a primer into there, make sure it's oriented the correct way, and then go ahead and put the piece of brass in there and go ahead and press the primer into the primer pocket. I do not clean my primer pockets. I actually did testing on this where it didn't really show any difference, frankly, from cleaning them or not cleaning them. So based on that data, I just gave up the practice of cleaning primer pockets. You may have been thinking, well, Brian, you're stepping ahead here. You're not cleaning your primer pocket, but my testing and data showed it's not really necessary. It doesn't really give you any gain. So I stopped cleaning them. And then, so again, back to the tool. I use priming tools that can give you adjustable seating depths. This one gives you adjustable seating depths and it clicks. So you can hear that click. That click going to the right gives you a more shallow depth. Clicking to the left gives you a deeper depth. I have it set right now to set the primers at about 8 thousandths seating depth, because I've determined, based on my testing again, that seating in this particular primer pocket depth with this particular type of primer and cup size, seating it anywhere from 7 to 9 thousandths gets you the most ideal precision. And so I make sure my priming tool, I'm able to vary the depths and I set them all at around 8 thousandths. So that's usually the sweet spot. This other tool here, PMA, also makes one that's adjustable. This one doesn't click, it turns. So it just kind of turns like this and back and forth, and that sets the depth. and I actually have to make a marking on the tool for where it is. So this right now is seating it at 6 thousandths. If I wanted to go up to 8, I have to turn it to 8. And again, I can go ahead and seat the primer with that. I also have what's my high volume priming tool, which is a Frankfurt Arsenal. So if I have to seat, 100 or so, like for example this 30BR here, I'm gonna have to seat 100 primers in here. I will load 100 on this tray. The tray has a cover somewhere around here, and then it connects here, and then it makes it quick and easy to just slide it back. A primer slides in, seat, bam. Primer slides back, seat, bam. So this is kind of my high volume fast primer, and it is adjustable. There's an adjustable thing right here, and it just so happens that I'm at the top of the adjustment. So in order to seat at 8 thousandths, I have to go all the way to the top of the adjustment, which I don't necessarily like, but it gets there. It gets to 8 thousandths, so I'm happy with it. Okay, let's see. All right, so after it's primed, at this point, what I'll do is I will lubricate the inside of the neck. I use Neo Lube 2. And my testing has found this gets the job done really, really well. I've tested with powder graphite and compared it to this. This seems to do a little bit better, so I stick with this. A lot of shooters have been contacting me and saying, all I have access to is powder. And I've made my own little mix of it. I've mixed my powder graphite with isopropyl alcohol to create my lubricating mix. That's fine. Go for it. I mean, if you don't have access to this, go ahead and do what you can. But anyway, you could take a cotton swab, or I recently purchased some other types of swabs that are a lot cleaner, that don't have the cotton, cotton on the swab, but I can't find them right now. I just moved residence, so I'm still finding things out of boxes. But anyway, but I do have this accessible, so just dip it in there. You can see it's dark black. It's very obvious. And then take it inside the case. Just kind of rub it in the case. Make sure, take a look. You can see it's totally black in there. I'll wipe kind of the edges of the case a little bit because some comes out to the outside. No big deal if you leave it there. Frankly, I've shot with this lubrication falling on the neck. It doesn't do anything. And then I found also in my testing that lubricating the bullet itself is good too. And there was somebody on one of my videos who made a comment about that. Hey, I'm a mechanic, and we're taught not just to lube, one section, to lube them both, and that way they sort of mate together a lot better. So I make sure that that is nice and lubed. You see a nice black right there. Now, with this lube, you have to wait a little bit for it to dry. It could take like 30 seconds to a minute to dry or so. I'm not exactly sure on the timing of it, but I usually just wait a couple minutes. So, and also one other thing about this procedure is it's not always feasible for me to do this. If I'm preloading before a match, I can definitely do this procedure, no problem. If I'm at a match and I'm loading at the match, typically the time constraints don't allow for this. So unfortunately, this is one thing that if I have time constraints at a match, I just can't do. But if I preload for a match, then I'm good to go. I can go ahead and lubricate these, let them sit out and dry for a little bit. Okay, so after they've dried off, then I'll have the cases set here in my case here. I have 2 electronic throwers, and then I have 1 manual thrower. My testing has shown that the electronic throwers are definitely better for longer ranges. So if you're going to go beyond 100 yards, like into like 200, 300, 600, 1,000, whatever it may be, it is best to use an electronic thrower. Or you can get a manual thrower that throws into a scale. I've seen those before, and then trickles, the rest. That's certainly possible. But again, if I'm at a match and I have time constraints and I'm only shooting 100 yards, I'll use my manual thrower and just throw the charges, and then I'm done. I don't trickle anything. We found that or I found in my testing that doing that at 100 yards with a high quality thrower gets the job done. But at 200, I definitely will break out the electronic scale. I use this IntelliDropper for 200 yard loads for sure. And I use this Matchmaster for anything over 200 because the Matchmaster is more precise measurement. It can measure down to 1 kernel of Varget very precisely. And I have codes built into this thing where you can custom make how fast your throw goes. Like you can tell it how fast to turn this tube and then when to stop it, and then how fast to turn this tube, when to stop it, and then when to start trickling. So I'm able to throw, like, for example, let's say 34.2 grains of H4 4198. It'll throw that in less than 20 seconds. It'll actually throw so fast that I can't really keep up with it, frankly. So that's why I really like this Matchmaster. You can customize the settings to throw different powders, different charges, and you can set it to where it does so in a very timely manner and down to a kernel. The IntelliDropper here does not measure that precisely. I mean, if we're talking, let's say Varget, for example, it may, it's not going to be very precise. You're not going to get it down to a kernel. It's going to be down to maybe 4 or 5 kernels, maybe 6, something like that. So this is why I use this for short range. It throws pretty fast too, and I like it, but this Matchmaster throws the fastest and gets me the most precise load. So anyway, go ahead and throw, and then what I do is I use a pretty long drop tube because, I do a lot of pretty hot loads, and I'm filling the cases pretty high. I don't, recommend it that you go really, really hot, but I have at times, thrown some pretty hot loads. I check for pressure and all that kind of stuff to make sure, I'm doing okay with those heavy loads. And generally, I'm able to kind of get close to, where you probably would see excessive pressure, but I'm putting a lot of powder in there to do it. So I use this 12-inch drop tube. What's cool about this setup too is the funnel twists off, and so I can have a funnel for different types of cartridges. Like this is my 6 ppc funnel, and then I have, like, for my 30 BR, this is the larger 30 cal funnel, and you just twist it on like that, and well, that's a 6 ppc case. Let me go back to the 6 ppc here. Okay, so just twist that puppy on and take a quick look, make sure it's, it's on there securely. In your loading block, you're going to want loading blocks that, match to a certain degree what the diameter of your cartridge is. You don't want your cartridge loosely moving around in there, because what I found is, sometimes when you're pouring through the funnel, and then you're done, you pick it up, something might flake off because the cartridge was offset a little bit or something like that. So definitely for your loading block, use ones that are the diameter, of your cartridge. So for example, when I load those 30 BRs, this is my 30, this diameter here, this will fit 30 BR. This was custom made by Sawtooth Rifles and fits that size case really, really well. You can put your bullets in this tray too here. Anyway, but this one fits my 6 ppc, so I'll get the powder, and when you drop it, if you have a large, pretty stout load, lots of powder, I'll drop it in kind of slowly, and that lets it kind of funnel down slower, and that enables it to really pack a whole lot in. If you just kind of drop it like this really fast, it'll fill up to the top really fast, and you might not even be able to seat the bullet if you have a stout load. So I tend to kind of drop it in kind of slow and let it kind of trickle in, and that packs it down even further. I think there was a test by somebody that showed that, yeah, the slow method gets more powder in there. Okay, so after that is primed, charged, I have my lubrication inside the neck, and I have my bullet lubricated. Now it's time for seating, and what I'm doing now for seating is I'm using electronic stuff for seating now. This is the amp press. Very good tool to have. Again, if I'm loading at a match, I may not be able to bring this amp press with me and use it, but I certainly will use it if I am able to load here at home. And so what I'll do is I'll just put the bullet on top there and then set my die. This is a Micron precision die made by Bullet Central. Very good die. I have it set for 6 ppc. I have it marked 20J is 20 thousandths jam for a particular type of bullet that I use a lot for 6 ppc. Put it on there, put it in here, and then what I do is set this up, connect it to the laptop, and I'll have it set to where the laptop will communicate with the press. Once the press notices that there's something, you know, heavy on here, it then automatically seats. So I have it set to automatically seat, and then I get the pressure curve here, and I can see how much pressure it took to seat the bullet. Now, if I get a bullet where the curve is kind of really weird in terms of its pattern or profile or overall pressure is at the end here, and you get a number here that tells you what the overall pressure is. I will sort that bullet out, because if it's showing something that's way different from the sort of norm or the average of the press of the curve, in terms of like the shape of the curve and the overall pressure, I'll sort that bullet out, and I'll use it for fouling or something like that, because something is going on. It didn't seat really well. It didn't seat like the rest of them. My testing is showing is those ones, you know, that don't seat according to the norm are not going to get you as great as a precision as the ones that seat smoothly in accordance to your normal curve and your normal overall pressure. If I'm at a match again and I don't have access to this, I'll either use an arbor press to do the same thing, or I will just use the press that is on the side of my press here. So see how that presses the bullet. So you get kind of two functions out of this one. You get a sizing function and you get a seating function. Okay, well, that is it in terms of overall loading practices. I do some things a little bit differently based on the match, based on whether I'm able to prep in advance or if I'm not. If it's, you know, a match where you have to have the greatest amount of precision possible, then I will use all the steps, and I will, you know, use all of the data that I determined is very important in all of the reloading steps. If it's a match that, you know, a fun match, a club match, or a match where, you know, I'm not really worried about, you know, top precision, I may skip some steps. You know, I may not use the lube, for example, or I may not weigh primers, for example. So it all kind of depends on what my goal is, and based on that depends on which of these procedures and processes am I going to venture to do. Okay, so, well, thanks everybody for checking it out. Please subscribe, like, and share. I also recently put up a Patreon account. It is very expensive to do all these tests, and it would be very much appreciated if you can make some financial support for me through my Patreon page. The link to that should be listed in my YouTube profile. All right, everyone, take care. Have a good one.